we employ adults. We need to trust them as adults, and we need to empower them as adults. And that's where great coaches come in. So for me, the future leader is a great coach. They're extremely curious. They ask amazing questions, and they empower their teams with excellent sponsorship. So that looks like empathy. That looks like bringing a wonderful facilitator, bringing teams together, and not being the one that has all the answers.
Hello and welcome to the Leader Insights Series podcast. This is the platform designed to uncover the secrets to both career and business success, gaining real insight from inspirational figures across the food and drink industry. As a reminder, I'm your host, Jonathan O'Hagan, and you've joined us for episode 3 of the series titled Let's Talk the Future Workplace. Now, the future workplace, it's a fascinating topic. Whether you believe it or not, the future of work is coming. For some, it's already here. It can be a bright future, a future that can improve our well-being and the well-being of the planet. So whilst automation and AI can sound quite scary at times, I think with careful regulation and policies that promote inclusion and equal opportunities, there are ways it can make our working lives happier, more effective, more human. Now, to talk about the future workplace, I've invited 2 people that I respect hugely. 2 people that every time I have conversations with, you just get a real sense that they're thinking about this every single day in their respective environments. Now, first of all, we have Julia Darvill. Julia is a regional director for UK and Ireland for Puratos. Julia's been on the show before. And as you'll hear, you just get a real sense that she's really focused on the future of the workplace and what things she can do now. She talks a lot about legacy and her impact, which I think is just amazing. So Julie offers a huge amount of value through this discussion. Our other guest is Louisa Hogarty. Now, Louisa, again, has been on the podcast in Series 1. Louisa, as a reminder, is the Group HR Director for Noble Foods. Louisa's fantastic. Again, her job is focused completely around employee well-being, employee engagement, creating the right environment for Noble Foods. They've been in existence for over 100 years. Her job fundamentally is about making sure the business is thriving in another 100 years. So Louisa, you can tell, really cares about this stuff. And both of them come up with some amazing, thought-provoking content. We cover a lot of ground. We talk about everything from what they envision the future workplace to look like. We talk about how people will go about recruiting and building teams. We talked about how they personally in their respective businesses have adapted post-pandemic and how it may adapt further still. We talk about flexible working conditions, talk about the rise of the green-collar worker. We importantly talk about leadership in the future and actually what skills and traits are going to make the best leaders of tomorrow. And then finally, we talk about some really interesting topics like neurodiversity, social mobility, and how people are managing their careers differently and how they will manage them differently in the future. So I hope this episode creates a lot of value for people. It's very thought-provoking, and you're hearing from 2 experts that are thinking about this stuff every single day. As always, subscribe to the podcast if you've not done so already, and you'll get notified of all future episodes. We've got some great guests covering some really interesting topics planned for this series. So stay tuned, as they say. And here we go. This is Let's Talk the Future Workplace. I hope you enjoy. Louisa, Jules, lovely to have you on. Great to see you. Welcome to Let's Talk the Future Workplace. So the first question, have you brought your crystal balls with you?
Pretty much.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a bit like that, isn't it? Yeah, we better caveat the conversation by saying, yeah, it's an educated guess, isn't it? The future workplace, but it's a fascinating one. And separately, we've both had, I think, really interesting conversations about the future, what we're working towards. Hence why I thought it would be lovely to have this roundtable discussion all about the future workplace. So, Jules, maybe if I come to you first to kick things off, from a zooming out perspective, what things do you envision when we think of the future workplace?
It's a difficult one because you've got to make sure that you're blending what's in your existing workforce with what you think will come from the next generations. And I think I get lost in what millennials versus Gen Zs versus alphas will be. And I'm a mother of 2 alphas. So I've got to consider what will Millie and Zara, for example, want in the future. And that's 15 years away. I think we're going to need more time, more trust, and more transparency in the workplace. And that comes into things like transparency will mean we'll want to see, I think employees will want to see more trust. Gender pay gap discussions have been going for years and years and years, but they want to have huge amounts of transparency on things like that. Same on how employers start to brand themselves, how authentic those will be. There's an awful lot of noise and even greenwashing around, and we'll come on to that, I know, in a little bit. So transparency is really important. And time will be about flexibility and agility. A lot of people, having come out of the pandemic, have talked about things like it's an absolute must to have flexibility and agility. But that comes also with a double-edged sword on how do we make sure the workforce is productive and maintaining that. And I think that trifecta of trust, transparency, and time, for me, is like the holy grail of making sure an employer has all of those things and measures them as well, making sure that that's a big foundation for how we measure success. Because most of my metrics, I don't know about you, Louise, most of my metrics at the moment are commercial. But we don't have enough to really look at how happy and healthy a workforce is yet.
It's really interesting you use that phrase, how we measure success, because it's the people joining the workforce now that are going to shape the future workforce. And I think their measure of success is going to be very different to ours. Louise, is there anything you'd add to that in terms of the big zoom out picture of, what you envisage the future workplace to be?
I totally agree with Jules's points. And I think for us, just on that measuring piece and listening, really listening to what our employees are telling us, what they want, they often have a number of the answers. But going back to your question there and zooming out, I thought about it slightly differently when I thought about that question and thought around what does the future workplace look like with the birth of AI and how we're going to be, in my view, very much more focused on innovation. The workplace is going to move far more quickly. And the future is all around how humans and technology can work in harmony and in partnership. So going away from that data capture and reporting to doing stuff with data. And therefore, the pace and the innovation is going to really step up a notch. And when you're looking then at the skills that you need going forwards, it's less around some of those more traditional skills, and that curiosity muscle is going to need to be far stronger than it is today.
AI is a really good point. Have you guys done much around, I'm sure you have, but are you immersing yourself in AI and trying to prepare as much? Yeah, I was on a webinar just last week and I'm immersing myself in it. But probably the overarching thing is the speed at which this is going to become integrated in our lives. And that's the slightly scary thing. It's the speed at which we adopt it. And like you say, Louise, they're adopting the skills or reskilling people. That's the interesting thing. I think I read somewhere 40% of our core skills will change because of AI. So it's how we adapt to that. But listen, AI is for another time. It's another conversation altogether, but a fascinating one nonetheless. So Jules, coming back to you, narrowing down a little bit, what do you think is going to be really important for this? Call it the next generation, but to people in the future, what's going to be really important for them to have when we think about their working lives?
I'm going to call out the word that Louisa used very aptly there, which is listening. I think the next generation are going to want learning organisations. They're going to want an entirely holistic approach. If I think about what turns on, or the zeitgeist that our children and the Gen Alphas are growing up with around them, and all of your listeners will either have somebody in their lives that is, directly either their children or that they know in their circles. If you look and watch what those little humans are taking on board, and indeed what they'll need, they're very different than the things that are normalised for our generation and the generations we still have in our organisation. And I think any organisation is going to really future-proof by looking and observing a more holistic approach. That means a package, for example, is as much about how flexible and agile you are, how much investment you put into the person. And that could not just be, commercial benefits. I read somewhere that Gallup said that in 2020, it had been full circle on the top 3 components that mean people choose why they choose to work for something. And in the top 3, usually you have package, and we normally talk about package encompassing your base salary. But actually that's number 3 out of the top 3. Whereas 30 years ago, and how I was raised, was a very different framework of ambition. My parents' post-war generation. So if we think then to the future about what our children are going to need, or what our children's children are going to need, they're going to need something that makes sure that people look after their bodies and their minds as part of the package, just as much as how much they're going to take home each day. And then similarly, have they got enough time to be able to do the things that fuel them? And that comes back to flexibility, I guess, and working time directives.
I totally agree. I think it's that whole shift that we've seen specifically since COVID, which has been you no longer live to work, you're absolutely working to live. And the younger generation are never going to settle for anything but that. And I was reflecting on the fact that they don't just have one job, they have multiple interests with the birth of side hustles or influencers and everything else that I can't pretend I understand. But we do have this multi-job ethic that's coming up in the younger population, the fact that their health is a priority. So if they don't have time to go to the gym and do the things that are important to their well-being, that will impact their choices. And the one that also is coming through loud and clear to us with some of the people we're speaking about too is the impact you are having on the environment. They're not going to stand for a company that's greenwashing. They want to see real, actionable items that a company's doing to look after the planet. And the engagement that you can get behind that is amazing. So I think for their well-being, the planet's well-being, and it pays important, but now it's a hygiene factor.
Absolutely. You look at groups like Wild Farmed as a regenerative farm platform, and groups like you've seen this morning, they've announced the latest Royal Households, along with Fortnum's, you've got Waitrose partnering. And a large part of that is how green their credentials and how sustainable their attitudes to things are. And they have the most incredible brand equity as an employer as a result of that. And the next generation will think that's a foundation-based minimum, which we take as something we think is almost sparkly and new and innovative. But you're absolutely right, Louise is right. This is the bare minimum expectation.
And it's the rise of the B Corps.
Absolutely.
In the pursuit of recruiting and retaining the best talent, which obviously has a direct influence on the bottom line, it's fundamental, isn't it? Where, as business leaders, where do you think we are in terms of progress made? Because ultimately there's shareholders to please, there's profits to be made, and all this stuff is really important. But where do you think we are in terms of attitudes and perceptions shifting to actually invest some time in this stuff that may, in terms of ROI, maybe a few years down the road? Jules, what's your experience? You work for Puratos, as I mentioned in the intro there. So, a big industrial bakery business that is there to make profit ultimately. So where are we in terms of progress?
I think we still have a long way to go. And I guess it would be unfair for me to speak on the whole of British manufacturing, but with an operational bias where we're still not as evolved in automation, where we're, using digital to make workers' lives better. I think we have a long way to go, but it starts with how we measure success. And we talked about that before, and we were having a chat before we went on air. It's really important that the foundation of everybody's strategy, which then translates into your dashboard or how you measure your success, has to start with people. And I work with a number of organizations through coaching networks where I sit in boardrooms with C-suite members, and everybody talks about their people strategy as if it's a bolt-on, which always frustrates me because that then directly translates into how we do or do not yet measure the components that we've just discussed that we believe are future-proof. And I think how you measure something like somebody's productivity, of course, there will be a commercial attachment to that, but it's slightly more nuanced. And it's the same as marketing. So when you sit in a room full of marketeers and they say, we've done this digital campaign, you say, can you directly attribute that above the line advertising to somebody's consumption? They'll say, yeah, I'm not sure. we're going to have to take a pinch of salt and try a few things. And I think we're evolving that now, but we have a long way to go until we're comfortable measuring output of some of these initiatives. I think the NHS we're very privileged in the UK, I believe, to have the healthcare system that we do. But obviously I'm part of a global organisation, and there's 91 countries and they have different attitudes. In some of our nations within Puratos Group, already there are initiatives, very advanced ones like in the Nordics, where there are government-sponsored initiatives, where there is a share of the wealth on some of these investments. So it's already sponsored that, for example, we talked about health. Somebody will be promoting the health of their workers. They will be then getting tax benefits from that. So that translates into commercial benefits for things. And I think we'll see more and more of that in the next 5 to 10 years, where we'll start to frame things that in our retirement ages, all of us on this discussion panel will probably say that's part of our legacy, that change. So I think we've still got a long way to go.
And Louisa, in a role like yours, how important is it to create space to think about this stuff? You know, what percentage of your time, for example, do you spend on helping a business like Noble work towards the future?
The answer is probably not long enough or not enough time, but we're really lucky to be a family-owned business, which affords us some time, and it also affords us to experiment and try things because we have a smaller shareholder group and they have a very long-term outlook. So we're over 100 years in business. With that comes a lot of heritage and legacy, which is wonderful. It also means change is not always going to be that fast. And we also have agricultural roots, and that's often quite traditional. So when we talk about the future of work, we have to remember we can only go as fast as some of our parts of our business can go. But in terms of how we do business, we are on a B Corp journey. It's not easy, the size of our business and over 100 years old to achieve that, but we've made really good progress. And we are going through that journey because we believe it's a really solid framework to prove that we're delivering against our purpose. And our purpose, better nourish people, animals and planet, is absolutely what we're setting out to achieve. So I think whilst we don't probably spend enough time today thinking about the post 5 or 10 years, what we are doing is pushing forward every single day on that B Corp journey to work better, to do the right things on the environment, to maybe experiment on a couple of things that we can do differently. And at the heart of all of that is our people journey and our culture. So everything that we're doing is how we're creating the leaders for tomorrow. And those leaders are going to be very different in some of those leadership behaviours and qualities than we would have had 15, 20 years ago. So a lot of investment, probably more in skills and in systems and processes that hopefully take us in the right direction, but probably not so blue sky 20, 30 years out at this moment in time.
And I did see about your Future Leaders program pop up on LinkedIn the other day, which looks fascinating. And I think we'll talk a bit about leadership and the skills that we will need in the future. Jules, how far ahead can we think about this stuff? You know, and conversations we've had, it's quite a long way, isn't it? But realistically, as a business leader, how far ahead can we think? Is it 2, 3, 5, 10 years? How many years realistically can we start taking action for?
I think that's a great question, because I think you can do both. You can have the 5-year outlook, which is, intrinsically part of your delivery and something you always want to engage your teams and communicate and bring them on that journey as part of your purpose or your mission. But I think it's essential that you have a more broader view. That's no different when we consider people. For me, it's no less important or more than when you think about your marketplace you're trading in. We're all thinking about what is changing about in 30 years' time in supply chain, for example. We're thinking about, I mentioned regenerative farming. We're thinking about what will the cacao price be and what will the evolution of sustainability of supply. So if we're thinking about things like that in 30 years forecasting, for me, there's same type of data crunching, as Louisa rightly said, the same type of working in parallel with AI to understand things. There's an awful lot of data out there that we can start to watch how we evolve as people, We know things like our behavioural changes will advance. We had a nice little insight, and I would say that's probably what it was, as painful it was. The pandemic gave us almost like a fast track, a little petri dish to understand how we behave in certain situations. We're growing up at the moment in and around us with war in many countries and in the regions that I work in, for example. So I think we've got a lot to learn from. And this comes back to Louisa's vital point around listening. An actively listening business should be documenting and observing in the people space how us as humans, how do we network differently? How do we move? I know we'll talk about social mobility shortly, but there are some macro trends that we should be looking at. They should be in boardroom discussions regularly for me. And those should be 30-year forecasts. Obviously, in the food innovation industry, we think about what will obesity be in 30 to 50 years. We look at World Health Organization metrics. We should be looking at the same thing for how people, what we think people's needs will be, and then start with those in mind and start shaping what as organizations can we start evolving day by day, step by step, as Louisa said. Rome was not conquered in a day, but we should always have in mind that future view.
And like you say, Louisa, Noble with 100 years of history behind it, actually, you should be thinking, well, in another 100 years, the business still wants to be there, profitable, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the things you can be doing now that will affect not just our children, but our children's children?
Absolutely. We talk about future generations. We talk about the next 100 years. And we know that the next 100 years are not going to look anything like the prior. We know it's going to be different. We don't know the answers to all of the hows it's going to be different yet, but one thing's for sure, it will be different.
Interesting. Let's pause for part one, guys. Some really interesting stuff there. We'll be back in 2 seconds. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Now, before I go to my next question, I wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, Obvious Candidate. Obvious Candidate was founded by Sam Waterfall, aka London's global career coach. And I'm delighted to collaborate with Sam as he has a truly unique approach to helping you get the job you really want. Having begun his own career in brand management at Procter & Gamble, Sam understands marketing. And he's the only career coach I ever recommend. Why? Well, simply because he gets results. As the founder of Obvious Candidate, Sam has 18 years experience in helping people to position themselves as the number one obvious candidate, head and shoulders above the competition. He's successfully worked with people who've gone on to land jobs with the International Olympic Committee, the World Economic Forum, Nike, Amazon, Virgin, Red Bull Racing, Rolls-Royce, to name just a few. Essentially, if your job search is taking too long or you're struggling to get the job offers you really want, then Sam is your man. Now, Sam and I have put together an exclusive offer for you, the listeners, where he's prepared to offer you for free a video introduction to his amazing precision networking method. And he'll also give you, again for free, a copy of his Dream 30 networking tracker. This helps you to organise, structure, and guide your approach to effective networking. I've seen it, it's superb, and it is a proven strategy that gets results. To reach out to Sam and take advantage, simply go to www.obviouscandidate.com/leader. Do it today. You won't regret it. Your next big job is waiting for you. Welcome back. This is part 2. As a reminder, this is Let's Talk, the future workplace. I'm joined by Julia Darvill from Puratos and Louisa Hogarty from Noble Foods. I think the next thing I wanted to pick your brains on, the both of you really, is through all my research and conversations I've had about the future workplace, is the demand on talent is only going to get even more competitive, really. So I guess as we think about the future workplace and how competitive it is to bring in the right talent, what's your thoughts on how we might go about recruiting people, how we might utilise teams, form teams? Yeah, Jules, have you thought much about how we go about recruiting? Will it be different? Because I guess the need to recruit the people with the right skills for the future is going to be vital, isn't it?
It is, but I think we're going to have to evolve again how we do that. And the large part of that is because at the moment people are missing out on opportunities. And I'm certain of this with my own experience at Puratos. We have a very high propensity to look at degree level educated for certain roles, for example. But long gone are the days where people are qualified by experience. I think that's going to go full circle, and the diversification of someone's skill set will make them more attractive. So if you think about the systems or the way in which we analyse somebody to come on board in an organisation, that's going to have to change. And I remember us talking before a couple of weeks ago, Jonathan, about, just as an example, neurodiversity. We have a number of questions that are so binary and don't allow for somebody to explore whether somebody might have, in our current systems, for example, you will do the usual ipsaptive tests, or you will do whatever personality dynamics, whatever the online testing. If that testing facility or environment is not right for somebody, we might lose great opportunities to acquire great talent that has specific skill, because our systems and the way in which we evaluate people don't account for that. And I think that's the same when it comes to all elements of diversity and inclusion. I think that definitely needs to evolve. And the second component of that on diversity of skill is we're going to have broader expectations of people. So just baseline skills in digital, for example, Louisa mentioned, she spent a huge amount of time and energy and will continue to do so in Noble on making sure that people have a foundation of skills. We still have generations in our teams who are still learning some of the basics that the next generation will find they can do with their eyes closed. So I think it's making sure that there's a huge amount of investment in people, and also the way in which we recruit people and training people who recruit. I've been in many interviews in the last few months as we grow as an organisation, and I'm always delighted to see great new talent coming in. But the way in which we form, even our questioning, needs to evolve for me.
I couldn't agree more. We have got this change happening where we took many of our tests out because they were prohibitive to many people joining. And for us, it's around the education of the recruiters. How do you move from, well, they haven't worked in X, Y, or Z factory, so therefore they can't work here, to really focus on attitudes, behaviours, and skills that could go across many different roles? And long gone are those days where you go into an organisation, you have a nice clear ladder from the bottom to the top as to what your journey is. You're very much more likely to go from left to right before you go up. And those are the people with those diverse skill sets that are going to bring the best thinking and the best impact to your business. But the biggest hurdle that I've experienced is the more traditional managers that are doing the recruiting in their image rather than looking for future fit skills. And really important to me is about behaviour and attitude. Most skills can be taught if you've got the right attitude. And we are well up for teaching lots of people skill if they have the attitude to want to learn it.
Absolutely.
I think this may link in with one of our earlier points around our measures of success. But you're so right, Louisa. People tend to, in my experience, recruit people, obviously, to do a job, hit the target. We've all heard those phrases, hit the ground running, this, that, and the other. I think until there's that shift around our success metrics being around things like well-being, and Jules, like you were saying, a much broader array of what we need, people will only recruit what they've typically recruited in the past. And my biggest fear is this sort of box ticking, like you say, oh, they've not done this or they've not done that. Actually, we're going to be moving towards a much broader place in terms of needs and skills and experiences. It's a big topic, but I think it's a scary place if we end up going down the AI box ticking route completely.
I was also going to add, for us, it's not just about that skills and behaviours. Being in roles, and I'm sure Jules has a similar experience, where you have more manufacturing roles or farm-led roles that are physical and they need to physically be there to do the job. My managers look for people that are full-time and fully flexible. And what that means is they'll work whatever hours I want them to work.
Yes.
Which you're not going to find them. They don't exist anymore. We need to be really clear on the hours that people can't work. What flexibility can we offer? Could that be two people that are sharing that job rather than one person that's going to work 50 hours in a week? So that has also been a challenge outside of the skills and behaviours. It's that full-time, fully flexible approach to how we'd love to recruit everybody.
Absolutely. I've got a lovely example of that, actually. We've got a farm in our recent acquisition in Puratos Forays, in which one of the ladies who is our best picker in the picking season, she does picking for a whole community. And it's bigger than just our organisations. And I'm sure it's the same at Noble. If people work in agriculture, they're part of a wider community than each of our organisations. And the lady that I'm speaking about is a single parent of 2, and she works her shift that she does when she's picking for us as a season. She's then picking soft fruits before us, and then after she's going on to seeds and grains and what have you. And she's part of a community of pickers with a brilliant skill set and knowledge. And we wouldn't traditionally have reviewed people like that, because we don't necessarily, like you said before, Jonathan, there's criteria we have defined. We need to break down barriers. The same is true of the degree piece I mentioned. We have a fantastic gentleman who's just joined us recently who has a military background. And on the surface of things, he doesn't necessarily tick all of the credentials of X, Y, and Z experience. For me, he's one of the most resilient leaders we've managed to acquire. I think he's brilliant. And going back to what Louisa said about attitudes and behaviours, this person might have come through the net and not, we wouldn't have swiped right, if you will. And that concerns me greatly, because we're missing people who have life experience and they have an education system that's less traditional, that is massively affecting positively the rest of the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with the Hollywood work model? Have you come across that?
I did read up on it, actually, Jonathan, because I saw some notes. It's not one I've heard called the Hollywood model, but when I read about it, I thought, okay, that makes sense. And for us, I suppose, in more manufacturing roles, it's harder to achieve, but maybe in those more project-based roles, we have elements of that we're doing with purpose across the organisation, not knowing it was a model of work, which is where we're bringing members of different business units together to work on cross-business projects for a specific period of time, and then moving on and dispersing them back. So I think that element comes in for our slightly more traditional structured businesses. It's not one that would be used a lot outside of that.
Yeah, it's definitely got a place in time, but it's an interesting one. And when we talk about things like the side hustle and I guess the slightly younger generation and their propensity to do a number of different things, variety, I think it's got legs when we think about the future. And I guess to clarify as well, by the way, if anyone's not familiar with it, it's essentially recruiting and, bringing together a group of people to achieve a common goal, and then you disband afterwards. So a bit like creating a Hollywood film, you bring in the actors, the cast, etc., get the thing done, and then you disband onto the next project. And I guess you only have to look at places like Fiverr and Upwork. I don't know if you've used any of those platforms, but they're huge now, in such demand. And it's an amazing platform just to dip in and out of talent when you need it fairly quickly. And I do wonder whether that's a place that traditional roles, you make a good point, Louisa, but I wonder whether it's a place that more traditional roles can utilise that model where you bring people in to achieve a certain goal and then off you go on to the next one.
We started this whole podcast by saying, where's a crystal ball? We don't have the answers. And we know that we're going to find the answers by bringing together the most diverse teams. And often that's really difficult to do when you're in an organisation surrounded by people that have been there 5, 10, 15. We celebrated somebody's 50 years of employment the other week. So we have lots of service in our business. But for example, on Friday, as a leadership team, we're deep diving on sustainability, learning about regenerative agriculture, which Jules also just mentioned. And to do that, we went out and we went to meet new people that were experts in that area to teach us, because we didn't know. And alone, we can't do that thinking. So I think it's being really open and curious as leaders to say where we don't have the answers and quite frankly haven't got a clue of where we're going to find them on our own, to bring in that extra resource and help that thinking.
I totally agree. And I think you look at all of our businesses, the lifeblood of which is innovation. It goes also beyond people's skill sets. It's also their baseline life experience. So we have a multicultural society to think of just in our marketplace, and many of the things that we do service Western Europe or even globally if we export. So we need to have a very good understanding if we're creating brilliant food for our consumers. It's not going to be for consumer A1 always. And understanding that starts with having people, just in our innovation teams, for example. I'm listening to what you're saying, Louisa, and I'm thinking there are lots of opportunities to cross-pollinate. Many of the organisations in the Food Network we're all part of are global organisations, and I'd like to see us challenge more to pull upon that, not just from sending the grains and seeds information from the Nordics, for example, and let's talk about malt from Estonia. Those are brilliant and really important. Let's do the same for people. Let's understand in HR communities how do we learn from each other, because the world is getting smaller.
That's a really interesting point. If you don't mind, guys, I just wanted to zoom in a bit on each of your respected businesses. The pandemic, look, it caused a huge shift in where, when and how we work, essentially, a huge shift almost overnight. What did it look like in your business? How have you adapted pre and post-pandemic? Louisa, maybe if I come to you first.
We carried on quite largely business as usual through the pandemic, be it that we're a food organisation, we have farms, we have manufacturing sites, and we're producing food, and therefore we had those lovely letters in our cars that said we're a key worker, and we continued. That's apart from 200 sort of central finance, procurement, HR roles, etc., that went to the work from home model, which is a really small amount of the overall organisation. Thankfully, we just deployed Microsoft 365, I want to say a month before lockdown. I mean, we couldn't have been more lucky with our tech deployment. And so we could switch on those remote working tools. And Jules talked about a Petri dish earlier, but we absolutely had that. You had to make it work and everybody had to adapt to it. And that was wonderful in terms of speed of adoption and people getting the hang of their technology. And who would think, 7 years ago, when we didn't even have the ability to make a video call in the business, that we'd be where we are today with many, many training interventions, many meetings, bringing people together. With our CEO and I go live every couple of weeks with an update in our social media platform across the business. And you look back even of just pre-pandemic and you couldn't even imagine some of that happening in an organisation that was as traditional as ours. So that's how we've adapted since. But the reality is through pandemic, apart from those core group of workers, there wasn't an awful lot else that changed.
And what's the adoption been like, Louisa, for this digitalisation, let's call it? Yeah, what's the attitude and adoption been like generally?
Well, they had to adopt it. So I think that's always, when there's a need, it makes it happen. And it's become a way of working. I suppose what also has happened over time, because we're sort of 5 years, aren't we, since lockdown, we've also had a change in some of those teams. We've brought in some younger people into some of those teams as well. And that is just how they work. So I think you've got both the traditional part of the business that had to adopt it and kept it, albeit we also want some of that face-to-face physical contact as well. We believe that's really important to come together as teams. And we've got the younger generation that have now come in, that's just how they work. I can't see it ever going back.
No. Well, you've made those changes now. And I guess this is the point around that huge shift we all felt. Actually, we look back now and it's kind of like, well, of course, we should have always worked that way. But again, as we think towards the future, you think, well, what's the next big shift going to be? Is it going to be imposed on us, or are we going to be proactive and almost get ahead of the curve? Jules, same question to you. How have you guys adapted after that huge shift that we all felt? What are the things that you've kept, you've maybe accelerated, done more of? Yeah, give us an insight into your business.
I would echo all of the things that Louisa has said, that as a business we had to embrace overnight evolution digitally. I think we are going through a period of refinement in year 5 now. In years sort of 1 and 2, in the thick of it, I think we all embraced a massive sense of community that I think we wanted to then understand why we hadn't had as much or as intensively previously. There was an awful amount of care and attention for everybody. And I think after that, there's been this in years sort of 3 to 5 now, a more exaggerated health concern and well-being and culture for caring. And one of the platforms we talk about Puratos with culture for caring is that holistic package that I mentioned, which is making sure that even the way we reward our teams and we grow our teams has enough time for people to learn and to look after themselves physically and mentally. I remember doing a piece of training when I was a wee nipper at the beginning of my career, which seemed very, very advanced, talking about words like wellness. And that was 20 years ago. Now there is a very different expectation and foundation that I'm glad has evolved from the pandemic. And I think the refinement in year 5 comes that hybrid working in 2019, just before the pandemic, we had 65% of our workforce on site. So there was a natural sense of community. It's now 23%, or it was at the end of 2023. And in 2024, we've actually got a strategic objective to make sure we are starting to connect again more face to face and differently. And the same for our customers, because the way in which we've almost unwired for a year of not being able to physically drive around the world with each other is still taking time for people to make time for us to go and visit and tell meaningful stories. And for, a lot of our suppliers and customers, they want innovation seminars and they want brilliance and dynamism. For me, that's personally going to happen when you can use all of your body rather than the bust that you see on a window on Zoom. And I think that the summary of all of that is that in 2024 and beyond, we will see more and more evolution of our culture of trust. Trust is at the centre of everything we do. It's in our corporate DNA, and I'm very proud of that. And I think overnight we had to assume people weren't going to be doing 6 loads of washing and messing around at home. We saw people's cat bottoms coming on and kids appearing and all sorts of things. We're having to have trust as an employer, all of us, in our employee. And that dynamic is making a shift. And I still think it's being refined, because for some workers, they can't have that level of flexibility because it's the choice, the nature of the work. As Louisa said, quite a lot of manual work in some environments. But that doesn't mean that's any less important for that workforce to have the flexibility and the agility to be present for their partners, spouses, their family dynamics. We're also seeing more blended family dynamics in society, and we need to make sure as an organisation we cater for that, because during the pandemic, these people had a really good balance and we don't want to unwire that. So I think Puratos' culture for caring is something that's a legacy that was just accelerated as a result of the pandemic. It was always going to be, as part of a family business, and I love that. We call it Puratos magic. It's kind of that thing you can't put your finger on. So I think we need to evolve that.
Yeah, I think the word care is really core for us as well. Our values are an acronym that says to care, and that's really at our heart. And I suppose the pandemic just gave us the opportunity to demonstrate that in different ways. But coming out of that, just like you say, not losing that momentum. And for us, bringing back that physical contact, we've probably accelerated that more middle of last year, and we're still on that journey now. Same with customers, going out physically, going to meet customers, physically bringing leaders together, even if it's quarterly, as well as doing the online pieces, because it's those water cooler chats as where business happens, where you find out things where all of the grey is filled in, and we absolutely miss that, and there's value in it.
Before we started recording, we were talking about checking in on health with each other. One of the things we were talking about was the fuel that we're yet to try and attach productivity value to from being at work, because for a lot of time we were unwiring or making sure that we had agility or hybrid working. And I think some of the stats that you've been chatting through previously about the need for hybrid working is essential. But I'll give you the live example with myself. We were saying during my treatment, so I was diagnosed with cancer in 2022 in December. In this last 18 months, the only thing that has kept me going are the days in which I can be with my team. So I think there is a more holistic approach that we possibly haven't even understood or dialed up yet, which is the role for the working environment to actually promote positive mental health. And I'm only speaking from my own experience, but I feel very privileged to work with the people I work with because they keep me going.
Thank you for sharing that, Jules.
we have also had people that have said it was great working from home at the beginning, but quite now I know I speak to people, but I'm lonely. So those that may have been 100% home-based, even living an hour away from an office, are now coming in 1 or 2 days a week because they need that physical connection.
I think there was a piece missing, wasn't there, when we had that shift and people could work from home. You know, once the novelty wore off, actually working from home, I truly believe it's a skill in itself. You know, we're all just so used to getting in a car, going to an office. But suddenly when you're tasked with working from home, so many distractions. And actually that discipline and those routines and rules that, I mean, I know because I've worked from home for a long time, I've had to build in. You know, I mean, I spent far too much money on an office in the garden for that exact reason, to help me stay disciplined. And it really makes a difference to my productivity. But I think that overnight shift in saying, look, you haven't got a choice, you've got to work from home. Perhaps there's an element of retraining, giving people the tools, knowledge to actually get a productive day's work done. And those lines between work and life, okay, they are a bit more blurred, but actually they're still manageable, but you've got to do certain things in certain ways. Otherwise, like you say, people will come back pretty quick and say, no, I want to work in an office, I can't work from home.
I think we also need to then think about what they're returning to, because for me, it's not from the world from old. It's not just a reinstatement of the things that were pre-pandemic. Even the way we wired and set up our offices is different than how it is now. It needs to be more evolved and more appealing. And I'm not suggesting that everybody has beanbags and what have you. I mean, Google, it was a great benchmark for lots of reasons. But I think we need to think about asking, this comes back to Louisa's point around listening, asking people what is going to make those experiences in the office most meaningful and productive for you. And I would love to see more organisations ask things like that in the next couple of months, because I think we have great opportunities to differentiate. The environment in which you are most stimulated is obviously very nuanced and different to the workforce.
Well, I've got some stats for you. I know everyone loves a stat. So 85% of UK workers want hybrid or flexible working conditions, and they do regard it as a deal breaker. And then 86% of people want to work from home on average 2 days a week. So this whole kind of flexible working ability, it's really important for attracting talent. It's a deal breaker, but also retaining talent. So I guess within your respective businesses, this whole flexible working movement, how does it manifest itself? You know, what are the things that you're trying to be flexible on? Louisa, if I'll come to you first.
I think we've naturally evolved to a ratio of about 3 days in the office. And that's been through, again, lots of listening and experimentation. And we're just now getting to the point where do we need some anchor days so that we have some really productive days where everybody's in. So we're just exploring that at the moment. And the days don't look the same. They're not 9 till 5 days. Some people do a 7 till 3, some people do an 8 till 4, and they're fluid. And there's no longer that moment in the office where somebody gets up to walk out and everybody's whispering or looking and thinking, what are they doing? There is that trust that people are delivering how they need to for their roles. So that's definitely moved forwards. But that, like I say, in offices is a small percentage of our workforce, and in production roles and in those front-end roles, this is the bigger challenge, because if 85% of the population want flexible hybrid working, well, what about all the manufacturing and farming jobs that can't offer that? So we've had to look differently as to the flexibility we can offer. So most of our operational roles are now on a 4 on, 4 off. So they do 4 longer days. And I think that's a great shift pattern personally. And it's definitely one that seems to go down well with our operational staff. And some work a continental, which is a 5 and 3. So we're doing different things with our shift patterns and then looking at how do we support families, for example. So do you have one member do 2 long days and job share with somebody else that can do 2 days? So looking at different levers you can pull. But the challenge for me is the workforce are all wanting a high percentage, 85%, 86% wanting that hybrid. What is the future of those frontline roles? Because they're never going to be hybrid.
And if I were going to build on that, I think that's where many organisations in our industry are going to have to invest heavily in things like automation. A lot of these working patterns that we talk about, a lot of the work could be evolved. And this isn't a mission to take workforces down to zero. This is about understanding how we could redeploy people and make sure that we invest heavily. We've done some really important work in our new M&A, for example, on making workers' lives better with these types of work patterns. I'm more concerned also about engagement of people going forward. I mean, we've worked very hard to make sure that when people are coming in, like Louisa said, there's reasons to be there, and that those anchor days have a way to connect with people. It's not just water cooler chats. It's coming in to talk last Friday about grocery aid and the role of our charity or a community, or it's giving people commercial surgeries to come and evolve themselves, or it's, the more doctor surgery style pop-in setups and more agility and that's going to challenge leaders as well to be more connected.
I think you're right. I think you make a really good point, certainly about frontline workers. The World Economic Forum estimates by 2030, 85 million jobs may be displaced by technological advancement, which sounds really scary, doesn't it? 85 million. However, they do go on to say 97 million new roles may emerge. These roles that are combining technology, and there's still the need for a human ultimately somewhere. So I think that's a really interesting one. Those frontline workers, yes, how do you offer flexible working conditions? Well, AI, automation, it's more than in our presence now. It's going to get greater. So those jobs probably will look slightly different. And that comes back to this whole reskilling people for the future, doesn't it? It's really interesting. I'm full of stats today and numbers.
You are.
So 4-day working week, dare I ask? What are your thoughts?
Well, the 4-on-4 off is a type of 4-day working week. But in our offices, we have some people that have opted to reduce or condense their hours to 4 days. But in reality, when your customers are still working on a 5-day working week, it's very difficult to maintain a service level with that. I think almost the country needs to go to that model and then it would work. I'd love to see it. I think it would be wonderful for everybody's well-being, but it needs to be en masse.
I think there's merit in what Louisa says around it's a country, this is a macro, this is bigger than us on this conversation. Some of the markets in which it does work well are places that are more evolved, like in Israel, Switzerland, Sweden. Many organisations have managed to make that work because there is not an expectation that you go to the supermarket and it's open from 7 till 7 on a Sunday, for example. So there's not that supply chain creating that demand. And we might not solve that on this call, but I think there's definitely an opportunity. Going back to the words experimentation, I love that Louisa uses that, and Noble and Puratos are both learning organisations, very, very deeply rooted in their cultures. I think we need to review things like that. This is different than when someone says, I want time whilst my small person is small, or I want to care for my mother, or whatever. This is different. This is about a fundamental shift in our expectation of productivity. I'll tell you, I'm completely useless past 3 p.m. every day. I can't make any decisions past 3 p.m. I'm very, very awake at 5 a.m. and run a marathon style awake. And so I think it's those types of patterns. We've learned a lot about ourselves as humans during the pandemic, and now we're more vocal about those things. It was very nuanced previously, or we're very British and stoic about things. I think we're now more vocal about what our needs are, and certainly the next generation will be.
Brilliant. Now, just before we break for part 3, I did want to get your thoughts on the rise of the green collar worker, which has been gaining some interest. Purpose and sustainability, as we know, it's a vital part of our lives, not just business these days. What are your individual thoughts on introducing more of these, positions that are intrinsically linked to, green credentials? Louisa, I think we've spoken before, haven't we? You've already introduced some roles. Have you got plans to introduce even more in the future?
Yeah, so we traditionally had a head of health, safety and environment. And in the last 6 months, we split that role. So we have a head of sustainability and now a head of health and safety. So we have that focus. It's just growing and growing. And we've also put a role in that's looking down our supply chain through the sustainability lens, because again, with agriculture, anybody that works that has a supply chain with agriculture will know that most of your Scope 3 emissions are going to come from there. So there's a huge amount of work to do. So we've recognised that. We've employed somebody that can really engage with that population. And we've got a role that's helping us internally with our sites and how we can be better. But that's, say, 3 roles. And the elephant that we have to eat is quite a large one. And I can see it evolving over a period of time. Outside of those dedicated roles, there's also investment in our environmental champions that we have on each site, and we've invested in their learning and development with specific sustainability training. And they've got together on their sites to do biodiversity projects. They give you great pride in showing how recycling is improved, or how they've built a bug hotel, or whatever it might be. But getting those grassroots people engaged in the story is the key. I wouldn't say we've cracked it yet. We've started, and hopefully we'll see that really come into its own in the coming year.
To build on that, I think we've done much of what Louisa's captured. I think what I'm proud of is the Group Executive Committee sponsorship. That means every single human in the business has a key performance indicator related to these topics. So even culturally, never mind adding the headcount in, we've got a very good and strong wellness and separately sustainability team group and in each local market. So that's very evolved in terms of, full-time employees. We've all got to be part of something, if we're saying in our DNA of our organisations. So I think that's one transition in the last year that's really evolved, is that we're all targeted in a similar way. So that it's not just the wellness lady or the sustainability man that have come in to do it is their problem. That's a cultural shift, which I'm proud of. And the second thing is, I think all of us as organisations need to think broader than our own organisations. The government and the access to grants and funds and all of the outside thinking of more expert. We're working more with startup companies and more with incubators that we have through Sparkalis. A number of fantastic grants are available. We almost don't know what we don't know. And I think particularly in manufacturing businesses, we need to get better at going, right, you're the PhD that's going to do a knowledge transfer. How do we share and evolve those things? And those are things that we can then gift to our customers as much, whatever evolves from that, whether it's around cultures of caring or whether it's around our sustainability platforms. There's a lot of money out there and investment and time given, but we almost don't know what we don't know. So I think that's something I want to keep evolving.
I agree with that in terms of, especially in the agri sector, looking at grants, and there are so many out there. It is a full-time job to find them. And I think partnering, we talked about skills earlier, but partnering with external organisations, PhD students, experimenting, that's wonderful, and that gives us part of the journey. I should probably add, we also as an exec team are all measured as well on our sustainability metrics, and we refinanced about a year ago, and we actually have ESG linked lending as well. So it's really at the heart of everything we're doing. What gets measured gets done, as we know, so always helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think what we do know is there's going to be more of these, we can call them green collar workers, but more roles that are assigned directly to, Jules, you've mentioned wellness. I think there will be more roles assigned to the wellness of people, or traditionally we maybe categorize that as employee engagement, but there's a space there, isn't there? Or the other way of thinking is actually it's going to be incorporated into every single one of our roles, because fundamentally it's part of the future. Great. We're going to take another short break. We'll be back in 2 moments. Hello, it's me. I really hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Now, before we move on to part 2, I have a little joke for you. How many recruiters does it take to change a light bulb? The answer? Just 1, but they'll charge you to change it again in 6 months' time. Now, whilst this may be funny, it is, however, very sadly true, as the vast majority of the recruitment industry is geared up to provide, on average, only a 12-week rebate period. Research shows that poor recruitment processes can lead to up to 1 in 3 new hires leaving within the first 12 months. The knock-on effect? Well, this is costing not just tens of thousands, but potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds each year to businesses. So, how can I help? Well, with almost 20 years experience under my belt and some 1,500 assignments successfully delivered on, I've actually developed a bespoke approach to hiring for those all-important senior management and board level appointments. This approach I call Leader 360. Leader 360 is a modern, scientific and insight-led approach. It empowers you to make more predictable and successful hiring decisions with an almost 98% new hire success rate. Yes, 98%. Because of this, we back it up with a 1-year guarantee. A crucial factor that underpins this bespoke approach is that I'm personally an accredited interpreter through the McQuaig Institute, one of the best behavioural profiling companies around. With our pre-hire assessments, we can provide actionable insights into a candidate's personality, cognitive and behavioural attributes. This then predicts both their chances of success within a role and, importantly, within your company culture. I've sadly learned the hard way that this is crucial in the pursuit of successfully hiring people and finding true cultural fit. So in simple terms, we remove the guesswork, we reduce the bad hire risk, we reduce your commercial downtime, and we reduce your overall costs, saving you money. If you're interested to find out how I can help you hire better, drop me a line. You can get me on John, without a H, Jon, at leaderexecutivesearch.com. I'd love to hear from you. Now back to the episode. Welcome back. This is part 3 of Let's Talk the Future Workplace. I'm joined by Jules and Louisa. The next thing I wanted to pick your brains about, guys, is leadership has evolved hugely in the last half a dozen years, let's say, especially with the pandemic, and that certainly accelerated a different need in terms of soft skills. Thinking about the future workplace, how do you think leadership is going to evolve? What are the behaviours? What are the skills? What are the styles you think the leaders of tomorrow are going to need? Jules, if I come to you first.
I think we saw, as a result of the pandemic, an expedited empathy starting to build in people as leaders. And I think one of the things that I want to see more of is that leadership, the central foundation of leadership is coach. Leader is coach, which is really understanding and making time, not only making time, but quality time for people to really understand and listen and get and consult and immerse in each other. We've moved away from 50s factory models of, leader is dictator. Then we went to kind of leader is central, and the promoter supporter behaviors are still very much in leaders. I see that in my peer set, in my competitor peer set, who I'm greatly respectful of. I think we need to evolve more and more the empathy and agility side of leadership. The pandemic taught us that we all have to be resilient enough to be able to think on our feet. No one had predicted that we'd be wiped out for a period of time, somewhat arrested development in some areas of our businesses. And we had to think very quickly about how to adapt. And that adaptability or agility is something people are going to look for safety. If I think about what I want from a leader in those situations, and more of those will come. And let's hope it's not as painful for everybody as the pandemic was, because many lives were lost. But we're going to have all sorts of things sideswipe us. And I talked earlier about the fact that we have wars in the regions that I work in. I've seen the leaders that I work in my Puratos peer set, the most adaptable and most emotionally intelligent that I've ever. I think they're wonderful, and I learn from them regularly.
I think the whole coaching approach is absolutely spot on. I don't know if people respect authority as much as they do knowledge these days. It's knowledge authority. Certainly for the younger generation, that almost gains respect. Louisa, do you have any further thoughts? What are the skills traits that will make the best leaders of tomorrow, do you feel?
I agree. Everything that Jules just said in terms of empathy, I think there's an element of humility as well that comes with that and that coaching style. For me, the journey is one from parent-child to adult-adult, which is a language I'm using a lot at the moment within Noble. We employ adults. We need to trust them as adults, and we need to empower them as adults. And that's where great coaches come in. So for me, the future leader is a great coach. They're extremely curious. They ask amazing questions, and they empower their teams with excellent sponsorship. So that looks like empathy. That looks like bringing in wonderful facilitator, bringing teams together. and not being the one that has all the answers, which historically has equaled leadership. Leadership equals answer.
Absolutely.
And I would love to see more leaders facilitate the answer from their team.
Yeah, and if I can add, when we think about AI, actually, AI could maybe make decisions based on spreadsheets and metrics and et cetera, et cetera. Actually, a lot of what you guys are both referring to is the softer skills, so empathy, coaching, curiosity. It's going to create hopefully more space for these sorts of behaviors, which is where I guess this embryonic sort of working in harmony, role of a CEO or a business leader can live.
That is uniquely human. And I think I've actually worked with coaching qualification trainers who are talking about this dichotomy we face now with AI. What is uniquely human about us and why we are evolved as animals is we all need to take breath. Whatever our political views are, where we are in the world, how rich or poor, it doesn't matter. What the meaningful connections are central to our evolution. And I think the more you can breed in leaders, for me, all of the investment in our leaders in the future will be their ability to coach. And those things that we've talked about so far today are all part of that. How to ask the right questions in interviews would come from a really great coach, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I agree. Well, work is no longer a place, is it? It's about an experience. It's about how people feel. I think you've said that to me previously, Jules. It's about how people feel in that business. And again, it all comes back to the same thing. It's about attracting, retaining great talent. If you make them feel like they're in a good place, engaged, happy, etc., etc., it's a winning formula. This maybe relates to the next point I really wanted to get your opinion on. I think we've made some great strides in recent years around understanding neurodiversity and building teams with that diversity element in it. Jules, first of all, what's your thoughts around the future of building neurodiverse teams? We talked earlier about moving away from the traditional kind of been to this university, got that sort of background. We have made some progress, but there's an awful long way to go, isn't there? What's your vision of the future around neurodiversity and the place it has within the workplace?
I think this is a broader topic of all inclusion. I think if we're going to really understand how to make sure we make the best out of all of the brilliant humans in this broad canvas we all operate in on this planet, we have to start with understanding. I think there's still a long way to go. I've been part of training in the last couple of years, or I've dropped into things where I can't help but feel like there is a tick box part of the training, which is, do we really then circle back and deeply check that people understand the spectrum of how brilliant brains are and, how different axes are wired? The way I explain this to my autistic daughter, myself also autistic, is that we all have brilliant cauliflowers and they're all different shapes and sizes and they all have superpowers. And there is no one right or wrong way of looking at something, but there are different ways of thinking about applying something. And we talk about the IKEA flat pack regularly in our organisation. There are people in the room that are already deciding where it's going to go, and there are people who are reading the cover to cover instructions. There's no right or wrong. It's understanding, first of all, how all of those cauliflowers are wired, and understanding then where those roles may be able to match those cauliflowers. And I think one of the difficulties we've got at the moment is just a baseline misunderstanding of things. And then I think if you can assume we get in the next couple of years to a better understanding, it's then working back. How are our current recruitment policies wired or not? How do our teams who are more mature, who don't necessarily recognise the need for that diversity, how do they evolve? And how do we make it safe for the next generation to articulate those better? My daughter is 12 years old and she can't articulate yet anything other than what I assume is a mother's bias of a super cape. But actually, I don't want her to go to an organisation and make herself appear special, because that's not the language I would want her to try and, if you see what I mean, I would want Gen Alphas to come into organisations and say, I am brilliant with numerics. I have a fantastic X, Y, and Z. And being able to articulate things very concretely is something that I think all the generations matched together need to have a different level of understanding. And then but a long way to go. You're absolutely right. A long way to go.
With my recruitment cap on, I think generally speaking, we've got to get better at recruiting teams as a whole. So not recruiting against a job per se. Of course, there's a need for that. But I think bigger picture, recruiting teams based on individual strengths that complement or sometimes counter each other for the benefit of the whole. You know, we've all, in the consumer world, I guess you've all got to build a leadership team that better reflects, you know, your broad base of consumers, right? And I think historically that physical kind of, okay, we all look the same, we all sound the same, it's quite easy to hear and spot. When we talk about neurodiversity, it's a little bit harder to spot, but I guess, yeah, we've got to start recruiting from a very different place, knowing where we're going in terms of that end goal of, okay, there's benefits here, here and here. Louisa, is this something you guys as Noble Foods are thinking about? Are you working towards it? What are your thoughts on it?
Probably similar to Jules, this is around the broader diversity of thinking. We spoke earlier around our lifeblood being innovation. You're not going to get innovation in a team where everybody's the same. You need diverse perspectives, different ideas, different ways of thinking, different ways of answering the same question. And you're only going to get that by bringing different minds in the room. I love and hate the fact, I think in Britain in particular, we love putting things in boxes. We love labeling things. And my children, very similar age, they're 12 and 14, they speak to me about, I think I'm X, I think I'm Y. And I was like, why do you need to label yourself? Why do you need to put yourself in a box? Just own your strengths, own what you're passionate about, own what you enjoy, and move on. We don't have to put a label on it. So that coming back to, you know, attitudes, behaviors, and skills. If we've gone in there to say, I'm great at maths, I'm great at analysing data, I'm passionate about our producer network, I can make a difference by, that's very, very different to, I've got a degree from X. We need to dig deeper when we're recruiting. And I also agree completely with you, Jonathan. It's not just about the role, it's about the team. And it's the broader team. And I don't think we've done enough yet really looking at team dynamics outside of how we work with each other and from a high performing team's perspective. But I don't believe when we go to recruit, we often look at the team enough in deciding the skills that we need.
Absolutely. And the same goes for environment as well. We've done a lot of training in the last year as an organisation. It's then given people license or language to come and say, I just want you to know that these bright lights and this noise have been annoying me for 8 years. And I've been sitting here doing a half-baked job. I think I'd be brilliant in this environment. Would you mind if I change? Absolutely. Hallelujah. So sorry, it's not felt safe for you to be able to or find your own language or own self-discovery to acknowledge that. And I think that's something we need to think about is environments when we come to developing a worker environment that is as agile as we need it to be as well when people are returning to these offices or turning into large manufacturing spaces with lots of noise, for example, or what have you. So the environment's just as key.
I think being agile or agility is a really good word. I was going to say individuality, but I think we're moving towards a world where we do need to cater for individual needs to bring out people's potential and strengths. But really, it is about agility, isn't it? It's recognizing and being agile and being able to move quickly enough.
And it also goes back to the trust and the trust you build in the organization and the ability and you have to truly listen and the safety that people have to provide the feedback, whatever any of these matters that we've spoken about today have been. At the core of it, we need people to feel safe to tell us, and we need to act on and listen from what we're hearing.
Absolutely. And unwiring some of the bias or unconscious bias that's in many of us. I'm guilty of it myself, where my programming or my own experiences in life have given me a perception of what is right or wrong. I'm only now starting to reflect on certain specific examples in the last couple of months that have come up where I've said, why does that not scan with me? And why does it have to scan with me? Because if this person, and I think that's really interesting, is that unconscious bias many of us have. And it's not remotely malicious. It's that humility you mentioned before, Louisa, is that all of us need to be curious and open-minded.
This may have a related aspect, but I wanted to pick your brains on the whole social mobility piece. As we look towards the future, I guess that gap between the haves and the have-nots, arguably it has gotten wider and potentially will get wider. I don't really know whose role that is. Is it government? Is it business? What's your thoughts, in terms of that social mobility piece? Is it a business's responsibility to create more equality of opportunity for people? Jules, if I come to you first.
Yeah, I think so. I think you make a good point on where does this stop and end, because we will see evolution of governments and regimes and people's, I'm not going to comment on the political spectrum, but I think the marketplace that we live in and the wider Western European marketplace that many of our businesses serve and our customers operate in, it's becoming more and more complex to be able to recognize until it's too late. We're almost at the moment treating symptoms, not causes, on a lot of these things. An example I would give is, I mentioned blended families before, but if you've got incomes where you've got a single parent family, for example, that's more and more common. And the mobility of somebody like that means that many organisations will take advantage potentially of whatever a work pattern may be, or the longevity of service of somebody. You mentioned before we came on this call, when we've discussed things together before, about how there isn't a rise on the breadline poverty in certain areas, and then we'll set up factories in certain areas, and that doesn't give anybody a right to command a low-end work level of income for somebody. That being said, we also then need to be coming back to the holistic package. If you can better lives by being able to afford people things like gym membership or access to things that are other benefits that improve people's complete lives, then I think organisations can truly differentiate. The same goes for some of our farming communities. For Noble, for example, same with Cacao Trace and the farming networks we have in places like the Ivory Coast and Vietnam. We're very committed as organisations to making sure that we can affect change at the root. But I still feel like we're treating some symptoms rather than causes. And I think that's probably more geopolitical than we are on this call.
I agree. I think as an organisation, and probably more in FMCG as a sector, we do have a unique opportunity to support and improve social mobility. We have a number of roles that don't need to have a particular education to get started. And we're really proud that some of the leaders in our organisation started as cleaners or started on the line and have been afforded the opportunity or taken the opportunity to learn and grow and be supported through the organisation. And for us, a real focus has been on apprenticeships, on how do we bring the people off the shop floor and give them those opportunities. Not everybody wants them, but if they do, then they can have that opportunity with us. And just last year, I think we had 6 people that trained to be Class 1 HGV drivers that came from all across the organisation. We've now had 2 women as well that's come through off the shop floor and are now our Class 1 drivers. So this is an opportunity from going from quite an entry-level job to a fairly well-paying job as a Class 1 driver, because they've taken the opportunity that we're very proud to be able to give them. So whilst we're not going to solve the whole of the UK's or the world's social mobility gap, I think we can make steps to actually do the right thing and support where we can.
And I would echo that with, again, the comment on investment, working with apprenticeship schemes and the government, and working with partners, even in a wider agricultural network with the Young Farmers Union, for example. There is an awful lot of other organisations. The Scottish Bakers within my industry, for example, are a fantastic entity that work very tirelessly, actually, to bring about change in underprivileged areas. The same goes for reform. So people in environments that have come out of prison going into given a second chance to learn skills that are meaningful or a craft. There's an awful lot I think we can all do if we partner with people around us as well.
Well, it comes back to this, according to the World Economic Forum, these 97 million new jobs that will be created. What are those skills that are going to be required to do those jobs? And what are the barriers to entry to getting access to training to get those skills to then get those jobs? It's a really interesting one, but hopefully there won't be those huge barriers to entry. Hopefully we're we're getting to a place where we're beyond those kind of tick box style, where did you go to university, et cetera, and yeah, those barriers to entry will be less. Just finally, guys, I wanted to pick your brains. Louisa, you mentioned it right at the beginning, this side hustle, which seems to be increasingly around these days. One thing I did find out actually through a bit of research is under 25s are moving jobs twice as often as the previous generation, which is really interesting. And I guess if that continues, the first question is, how sustainable is that? But secondly, this side hustle, as business leaders, are you embracing it? And again, thinking about the future, is that something that you would welcome? People doing a number of different things that, of course, aren't conflict of interest, but maybe complementing their skill set, for example. So, what are your thoughts on the side hustle, the advent, I guess, of people moving around a bit more and having more of a portfolio career? Louisa, if I come to you first.
I was reflecting on, if people are moving twice as much as their previous generation, I wonder if the previous generation probably were moving twice as much as the one before that, because the one before that were in jobs for life. So I think this is just something that's continually evolving. So I've just addressed your side hustle piece first, because I find this absolutely fascinating. When I do have one or two moments where I do indulge myself on a bit of TikTok scrolling, I am inundated with what the latest side hustle is, and I'm avidly watching, thinking I've missed something in my life, that I should be multimillionaire by now by following all of these side hustles. So maybe watch this space, I'll find one. But this is the real life. Certainly the younger generations, they're doing all sorts of things, many of which are really creative, which I find fascinating. And whilst I don't believe we're seeing enough in our business as to what our employees are doing on the outside, now and then we do get a lens into it. And we've uncovered in our organisation the most phenomenal photographers, for example. So send that photographer out for a day, offer their day job to some of our sites to get our new pictures, rather than hire an agency and pay them an extraordinary amount to do it. So I think it's an ability for us to untap potential and passions within the organisation. I suppose it comes back to that trust and the openness as to how much they're sharing, and perhaps some local teams will know. So that still needs some work. And with regards to people moving more quickly, I think that's a fact of life. And my view is you give them the best possible experience that you can whilst they're with you. Because in 5 or 10 years' time, they may come all the way round back to you because they had the great experience, and now they've got such a wealth of other experiences and skills they can bring to you. So it's a fact of life. They're going to move on. We're going to give them the best experience we can while they're here.
I love that. And I would say that, to echo that last point that Louisa makes, the idea is legacy for me, is that if somebody can leave having had a great experience with you as an employer, they are going to continue to be an advocate of yours. Every organisation I've ever worked for, I feel really genuinely privileged. Maybe I've been very lucky, I don't know. But I've always been an advocate of their brands, I've always been an advocate of their DNA culturally, because of those experiences being so positive. And to the point when you then, it's an extension of your brand equity, when someone says, do you recommend? Absolutely, I recommend working for this person or X, Y, and Z. I would say that we also need to reframe how we see something like this, and this touches on Louisa's note around trust. Loyalty and the way we talk about attrition targets and things like that means that we often see or frame that somebody leaves as a failure. And I don't see it that way. There are an awful lot of very valid reasons why somebody's life will change, and it is a fact of life, as Louisa said. But I think framing that as an opportunity, that somebody is broadening their horizons, gaining more skills, moving laterally in their whole holistic career, means that they will circle back. And on a side hustle note, we've got loads of lovely examples similar to Louisa, where we've had people come to us and say, I have these and these things I do. But it comes back to that psychological safety in the first place. You need to be able to create an environment. And we're not there yet. In some areas of the business, we need to evolve, where people feel they can come and say, I do that, or I'm interested in this. I would like almost to recruit this person to be involved with that thing, and have trust that that person's going to give you whatever they're committed to do in their contract, as well as whatever it is that profits them. There are an awful lot of the examples that I see in our organisation where people have a side hustle, where it's good for their wellness and their well-being, or it's better for their family, for a supplementary income, but also for their mental health. Then that means we get the best version of themselves. So I fully sponsor that.
It's a really good point. It comes back to that deal breaker aspect, this flexible working conditions, because it used to be almost the preserve of, let's say, the semi-retired to become a non-exec or an advisor or have a...
Moonlighting.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas now it's much more commonplace for people much, much early in their career. And like you say, Jules, their motivations for doing it, the desire for doing it, it's different. It's not really income. Well, for some people, it's not income related. It's about diversity. It's about enjoyment of the work. It's about increasing your skill set, and that's good for both the employer and the individual. So it's a fascinating one. I think probably what we do know is it's going to become more and more commonplace, isn't it? It's going to accelerate. So how we adapt and, to your point earlier, our bias or unconscious bias, how we perceive it, is going to continue to evolve. But I think I can confidently say it's going to accelerate and it's going to become more and more so. When we ask our children, what do you want to be when you're older? Policeman, fireman? No, it's going to be, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. Okay, which one? No, all of it. I'm going to do all of it, all at the same time. And why shouldn't they? Brilliant. This has been wonderful. Thank you, guys. It's interesting stuff, isn't it? I don't think we confidently can predict what the future looks like, but there's some really interesting things you've raised there. I think we should meet in 15 years' time and review. And we'll give ourselves a score out of 10 and see how we do. So yeah, 9:30 in 15 years' time on this day.
In the diary.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been fascinating. Thanks for spending the time with me.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And there we go. That was a discussion on the future workplace. I thought that was fascinating. It's always amazing talking to people like Jules and Louisa, people who are absolutely passionate about the future. And as you heard from Jules, she's working really hard. She wants to create a legacy for her children and the future workplace that is more inclusive, diverse, one with less barriers to entry. And Louisa, much the same. They're both working really hard and thinking about this stuff every single day. So it's really interesting to get their thoughts and opinions. I think one thing's for sure, look, we're still in a bit of a flux around the workplace, Do companies need a physical head office? What's the role of remote work? What does flexible working actually mean? There's still an element of flux. The dust is yet to settle. I think what we do know is, as we look towards the future, this shift will be led by companies. It won't be led by governments. I think it'll be led by companies in their pursuit of the best talent. As we know, the best talent drives company performance. And as we get clearer on what that talent looks like going into the future based on what jobs we need, companies will shape their strategy accordingly. But certainly the workplace in itself, it will be as much about the experience you can offer employees. As I mentioned in the show, it's no longer a place of work, but an experience, really. That'll help you retain the best people, attract the best people. And it's those companies that are thinking about it and working on that stuff now. The people coming into the workforce now are shaping what that future workplace looks like. I think the other big takeaway for me is there's going to be an awful lot of jobs created through automation and AI. As I mentioned, some 97 million jobs are going to be created. That's a huge opportunity for people to upskill, reskill, and it's those employers that help employees reskill. They're going to be the winners. So again, how are companies supporting people to reskill for those jobs of the future? We don't fully know exactly what those jobs are. Some of them we do, but I think, again, it's those early adopters, the ones that are thinking about this stuff, will be the winners in the near future. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I thought it was fascinating. There may well be a part 2. Who knows? We may well revisit in 10 or 15 years to see how accurate we were on some of these topics. Finally, I just wanted to say a big thank you as well for all your lovely feedback I've had over the first couple of episodes. It really does make a difference. I do this because people give me feedback and they say it adds huge value to give an insight to business leaders and what they're going through, how they're tackling and what they're thinking about on certain topics. So thank you so much for the feedback. I'll keep doing them as long as you're getting value. And stay tuned. We've got some really good topics coming up for the rest of the series. Do subscribe if you've not done so already, so you get notified as soon as new episodes are released. And thank you once again. We will be out with another episode very, very soon. Until next time, take care.